The Center of the Cyclone by John C. Lilly, an autobiography of inner space, Chapter 4. At the close of the 1964-65 series of experiments, and with the new laws in regard to LSD, it became very difficult to continue LSD research in the U.S. Out of the original 210 investigators, there were only 6 left who were willing and authorized to continue the work. In the new atmosphere of suspicion, distrust, and fear, I decided not to continue the work until the atmosphere cleared. I took this intervening time to follow the instructions of the guides and to clean up the messy details of my life. In their communications with me, the guides had made it very clear that there were many unsatisfactory aspects to my life, i.e., that I had accumulated a great deal of responsibility in the form of professional colleagues, employees, family, children. Before I could progress further and move deeper and in a more thorough fashion into these far-out spaces, it would be necessary for me to solve the problems of my planet-side obligations. The planet-side obligations consisted mainly in the rather large Dolphin project that I was directing. My activities consisted in doing and encouraging others to do research on the brains and communications of the bottlenose dolphins. The karma that I had accumulated with respect to dolphins was a very peculiar one. Quite early in the research on dolphins, around 1955, I had realized that dolphins have a very large brain, larger than ours, and that they are far more developed than we are in strange and alien ways. From 1959 until 1966, I have been working on the problem of communicating with these beings. To do this, I was using the classical methods of catching dolphins and putting them into confinement in a laboratory. The work was being done by 2 groups, one in St. Thomas and the other in Miami, Florida. In Miami, the group was mainly the brain research group. In St. Thomas, it was mainly the communication group. During the LSD experiences in the tank in the Virgin Islands from 1964 to 1966, I had come upon the powerful set of concepts of going with the flow, of following instructions of the guides, and of feeling the pulse of the universe here on planet Earth. Partly this comes from inside oneself, and partly from other sources, at present unknown. The instructions of the guides epitomized the sources unknown. In the awe, reverence, and wondering of exploring the many spaces present inside myself and in the universe, I found that I was developing a very powerful ethic. This ethic was beginning to regulate my life, my attitude, my relations with others, and my professional career. This ethic I epitomized in The Mind of the Dolphin when I said that I had borrowed Erik Erikson's rephrasing of the Golden Rules: do unto others and not do unto others what you would have the others do unto you and not do unto you. The others are to include other species, other entities, other beings in this universe. I finished the book, The Mind of the Dolphins, in 1966, and it was published in 1967. At the time of publication, I had all the information that was needed to carry out the instructions of the 2 guides and to follow this new ethic. However, to do so was going to cost me a lot of inconvenience, a lot of friends, a lot of pain, and my family. I suddenly realized that I must stop the dolphin research. It was not being done in consonance with the new ethic. What I was doing and allowing to be done in my name was counter to where I wanted to go, and hence it must be eliminated. If I was to realize my desires to move into these regions, these new spaces, and communicate with these new entities, the Dolphin project would have to be finished and thoroughly done over. The only way I could see to do this effectively was to completely eliminate the whole then current Dolphin project and wait for a number of years until a proper one could be designed and carried out. As I wrote in The Mind of the Dolphin, the new project would mean complete freedom on the part of the dolphins to come and go as they pleased, rather than as we pleased. In that book, it was proposed that a house be built by the sea. Part of the house would be flooded so that the dolphins could enter and be part of family life in that house. Both Margaret Howe, my associate, and I came to this conclusion after a dedicated communication efforts Margaret made in the Dolphin laboratory in the flooded rooms of St. Thomas. To clear the way for this new project based on entirely new assumptions, the current projects were allowed to be closed down. The day that this clear decision came to me, and before I'd had a chance to communicate it to my colleagues, one of the dolphins in the Miami laboratory stopped eating. During a subsequent 3 weeks, despite powerful medical aids to recapture her appetite, she wasted away. During the next 3 weeks, 4 more dolphins committed suicide by refusing to eat or breathe. Before the remaining 3 could commit suicide, I decided to let them go to sea. They were released in a tidal boat basin connected by a narrow channel to the sea. The oldest of the 3 we guessed to be about 40 years old. The other 2 were very young, 3 to 5 years old. Before the old one would allow the 2 younger ones to go out to sea, he cruised them around the boat basin and kept them down in the water. They kept trying to jump up to look into the boats and to respond to humans waving at them. He knew that this would lead to their deaths at sea. Large numbers of people carry guns in their boats and shoot at dolphins that insist on showing themselves. This task took the older dolphin about 3 hours. When he finally achieved his aim of keeping them down, they all left through the channel to the sea, and that was the last we saw of them. We hid ourselves behind a wall so that they did not see us, or they would have come back and stayed around. We had decided to make it a clean break, and so hid ourselves in order to watch what happened. The original projects in our laboratory had been set up on the basic premise that until we demonstrated scientifically the excellent quality and size of the dolphin brain in detail to the scientific community, we had no basis for others joining us in our belief that they are highly developed beings. They are comparable, if not superior, to humans in strange and alien ways. I had agreed with the neuroanatomist to sacrifice 3 dolphins at the beginning of the project so that they would have sufficient anatomical material of first-class quality for this brain anatomy demonstration. Even at the time, I had doubts about the ethical correctness of allowing this kind of work to be done. However, I approved of it in the sense of generating scientific data, and hence propaganda for the dolphins to be accepted as first-class biological organisms. I thought that this kind of acceptance by the scientific community was necessary in the future for our best relations with the dolphins. However, I still feel uneasy about this kind of justification. At the peak of the dolphin research, we had 30 people working on this research. My ethical duty here was to close down the research in such a way that these people would not be left without jobs. During the subsequent year, places were found for these people. The dolphin brain group was moved intact to another scientific laboratory at Worcester, Massachusetts. Our computer was sent back to the National Institute of Mental Health at Bethesda, Maryland. The accumulation of scientific apparatus was split between the Brain Research Group in their new location and the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, to which I was moving to continue LSD work under legal auspices. During the 1964 to 66 series of experiments with LSD, the relationship between my wife and myself had become intolerably strained. In the subsequent retirement of all the Dolphin projects, she and I became separated. The accumulated strains between us became so painful that it was necessary to terminate the relationship. In the summer of 1968, the last of the Dolphin papers, entitled Reprogramming the Sonic Output of the Bottlenose Dolphin, was published in the Journal of Acoustical Society of America in the July issue. This paper summarized my position in regard to the present state of the art of communication with the bottlenose dolphin. It added considerable technical detail to what I had written in The Mind of the Dolphin, published the previous year. The new ideas derived from the LSD tank experiments, the human biocomputer programming and metaprogramming view of the brain was applied here to the dolphins. Instead of using the limited psychological framework of conditioned reflexes, negative and positive reinforcement, and stimulus response, I derived a new set of theories and procedures based on the theory called reprogramming. This particular theory we deal with in greater length in this book. The basic postulate is that the dolphin has a very large biocomputer which can be reprogrammed through his natural inputs and outputs in a continuous interlocking feedback relationship with the humans and his biocomputer and his natural inputs and outputs aided by instrumental means. During the transition period, while I was transferring the dolphin work to others, I pursued a peculiar effect that we had noticed when working with the communication systems of the dolphin. In order to study the dolphin humanoid vocalizations, we put what the dolphin said onto a repeating tape loop where we could study it. We then had a group of people guess what the dolphins were saying. We obtained a list of, say, 10 different words that they thought the dolphins were saying. To complete our study, we then had to take the vocalization of the human, which had just preceded the dolphin vocalization, and put that on a tape loop. We quickly found that listening to a repeating word in clear, high-fidelity English generated more alternates than did the dolphin emission. If one listens to a tape loop of a repeated word for 15 minutes, one may hear as many as 30 different words other than the one which is on the loop. We did an extensive study of the word cogitate. We exposed something of the order of 300 subjects to this word for periods of 15 minutes to 6 hours. We asked each subject to write down the words that he heard or to report them with a microphone on another channel of the same tape recorder. From these 300 subjects, we got on the order of 2,300 different words. 300 of these words were in the dictionary. The rest were words we do not ordinarily use, i.e., non-dictionary words, as we began to call them. In this work, I received the very enthusiastic contributions of Margaret Nazer, a student of linguistics from the University of Wisconsin. Margaret had tremendous energy and initiative and carried out the study using the IBM 360 computer system at the University of Illinois to analyze our studies. Dr. Heinz von Foerster, Vonfoerster, at the biocomputer laboratory was intrigued by our results and arranged for us to use the computer. The computer analysis showed us that for each sound slot in the word cogitate, the human biocomputer on repetition turns over and selects other sounds, which one then hears as if coming from the stimulus word outside. Since such sound is called a fawn, each such sound is called a fawn, P-H-O-N. We found that on average people tended to make 12 fawn slots in the original stimulus word cogitate. The minimum number of slots was 3 and the maximum number was 26. The number of substitutions of sounds in each of the 12 slots was different. For the first slot, there were 13 substitutions. In the second, 44 different sounds were brought in, and so on. It turned out that this repeating word effect made it possible to demonstrate very rapidly to live audiences their own biocomputer operations. This is the reason that I went on with this work and made the transition from the dolphin to the human through the repeating word effect. It was an extremely convenient way of demonstrating to people their own self-metaprogramming and the various concepts of the biocomputer. In addition to hearing alternate words when being exposed to the repeating word stimulus, I found that certain people went through various kinds of trips. In one audience of 200 people, we found something like 10 to 12% of the people tripped out and did not report anything about the alternates that they had heard. When I was able to quiz 2 of these people about what had happened, they described trips very much like the ones that I had found in the isolation tank. In addition, we found that we could program the alternates a person could hear, or would hear rather, by various means. To see the probability of the alternates that were heard, the subject would listen to the repeating word for an hour and write down all the alternates he heard and print them on cards. Next, the subject would turn on the repeating word and listen to it while looking at the cards one at a time. He relaxed, and then he turned up a new card. He heard the alternate printed on that card. This experiment showed that visual input can program what is heard. We found that peripheral vision, that is, the vision which is off the main axis, where from where one is looking, could also program what was heard. We printed alternates with very large letters on cards and brought them into the peripheral view of the subject while he was listening to the repeating word. He then reported out loud what he had heard. The word that was being brought in from the periphery, in spite of the fact that he could not read it consciously, started programming what he heard. This was a programming gradient from the farthest reaches of peripheral vision at 90 degrees to the optic axis, toward the focal center on the optic axis, just before the subject could read the word consciously, that is, where it was still far enough off the central axis so that he could not read it consciously. Let me start the sentence again. I think I've muddled it. Just before the subject could read the word consciously, that is, where it was still far enough off the central axis so that he could not read it consciously, the word was programming 90% of what he heard. The experiment demonstrated that people are constantly being programmed at low levels of their awareness by periphery of their vision. It is probably a good thing that this is true. It allows us to drive a car and to walk and to do various other things, including reading in a smooth fashion, without having to think about everything that happens. The human biocomputer is constantly being programmed, continually, simply and naturally below its level of awareness by the surrounding environment. Okay, I'm going to read that sentence again. The human biocomputer is constantly being programmed, continually, simply and naturally below its levels of awareness by the surrounding environment. We noticed that some of the subjects were quite upset with these effects, which were beyond their immediate conscious control. They would not accept the fact that their brain was reading a word and registering the meaning of that word below their levels of awareness. No matter how hard they tried, they could not read the word unless they put their visual axis directly on the word, thus spoiling the experiment. To avoid such effects, of course, we had an observer looking at their eyes, and any cases in which they let their eyes move were discounted. This kind of upset was easily corrected by continuing the demonstrations. As the person got used to such results and accepted them, he no longer became upset by the unconscious operation of his biocomputer. Later, I was to use this effect to show people some of the projection mechanisms of their own biocomputer in workshops at the Esalen Institute. From the repeating word effect, I learned something about going with the flow, relaxing and allowing instructions from someplace else to run my biocomputer. If one relaxes totally while listening to the repeating word, one can quickly find all the phenomena that I have described above. However, if one is uptight and refuses to really let go, even though one would like to let go, these phenomena just do not occur as frequently. My further lessons in going with the flow and following instructions were given at Topeka, Kansas, by Dr. Ken Godfrey and his colleague, Helen Bonney. I started a series of experiments with Ken and Helen on hypnosis. I wanted to find out if I could achieve the same state of hypnosis as I achieved in the 64 to 1966 experimental series with LSD. I also ran into some very powerful mental telepathy experiences under these circumstances, which were a further demonstration that if one went into the flow and followed the instructions of the two guides, various things would happen that are not explicable by consensus science means. In Topeka, the three of us, Ken, Helen, and myself, first became very deeply acquainted with one another in a 6-hour session in which we barred no holds in regard to what we were and what we wanted to do. This kind of preliminary conference in depth is very important in order to be able to relax enough with one another to get the programming effects of the hypnotic trance. In order to relax enough to ease into these special trance states, one must be thoroughly acquainted with and trust the others. At the first session, it was decided that I would try to go deep and that they would stay at lighter levels of trance. I would try to get back to the region of the two guides. I knew I could get to that region under the threat of death or with LSD in the tank. That is, isolation combined with a chemical. The point of this experiment was to see if I could get into this region by non-drug, non-isolation methods in the presence of other people. Ken was the programmer and Helen gave me support as I went deeper. In the first experiment, I came upon various hindrances to getting to the guides. As I was going deep, trying to reach the region of clear golden light, the golden light appeared on my left, but a very dark, threatening cloud appeared on my right. I felt deep evil upon evil coming in from other dimensions on the right side. The right side is the only side on which my migraine attacks occur. Helen Bonny was on my right side, Ken on my left. The split in my being was good on the left and evil on the right. This split was finally abolished when Helen started working on the entities and forces coming from the right. The experience here was very similar to the one in which I worked on my migraine with LSD. Then a hole in my head opened up into the universe and evil entities came into my head from the right. Helen and Ken accepted this evasion of going deeper and programmed me out of it. Suddenly, the evil blackness withdrew, and the golden light took its place over my whole being and visual field. The two entities or guides did not appear, but their presence was felt. I received various instructions from them about continuing on the path that I had chosen. I felt a very great approval of what we were doing and a great satisfaction, and a sort of blessed state came over me. I was in the flow, doing the correct thing, following their previous instructions. This was a very rewarding experience. That night, I went back to my hotel room after the experiment. I had been thinking about my human's guide of the first 2 LSD trips before I went to bed. In bed, I immediately went into deep trance. I became a point center of consciousness, radiance, love, and warmth, about 2 feet above the floor. I was in a bedroom off the left-hand foot end of the bed. I could see 2 table lamps, one on each side of the bed. There was no one in the bed. On the bed was a beautiful cover. I saw along the left-hand side of the bed. I was filled with feelings of warmth and love. Suddenly, the cover over the bed on the left-hand side, near the floor, burst into flame. The flames traveled up and began to go over the top of the bed. I smelled smoke and I moved back, feeling a sense of threat. I came back to the room in the hotel and I suddenly realized that I had traveled out of my body from Topeka, Kansas to Beverly Hills, California, and that I was in the bedroom of my first LSD guide. I called her up on the telephone and just said, "What happened a few minutes ago? 5 minutes ago, sorry." And she said, "I was in bed with all the books on the top of the bed reading, and I got up to go to the bathroom, came back, I couldn't find my glasses among all the books, and I grabbed the cover over the bed and violently shook it, throwing all the books on the floor. I very briefly lost my temper, found my glasses, and climbed back into bed." I then told her what I'd gone through. She agreed to report anything further that happened during the subsequent 2 days. She agreed that it was important that first she tell me what had happened to her rather than the other way around, so that we would not be doing a crossover or parallel programming. In these experiments, I wanted to see if I was traveling and detecting what was going on in her particular regions. These experiments would have improved if we would have been improved if we had had a third observer to which each of us could have reported, but we decided that this was the way to do it at the time. The next day, Ken, Helen, and I repeated our experiment from the previous day. Once more, a peculiar repetition from the past took place, and it appeared as if I was evading getting to the 2 guides. As I went deep into trance this time, I suddenly was on another planet, not Earth, in a deep cave, a very peculiar vertical cave, with a spherical chamber at the bottom. Somehow, I did not know how to get out of the cave. I looked up through the vertical shaft, and I saw a blue light at the far end of the tunnel. I was threatened by the fact that at the edges of the shaft there were what I thought to be solid-state life forms, small, cubical, and rectangular creatures who were doing some sort of work that I couldn't understand around the edges of the shaft. They were very busy, and they covered the whole surface of the shaft. I estimated that none of them was larger than 3 to 4 inches across in the largest dimension. Somehow, I felt that I was trapped in this spherical chamber, and that I did not dare go up the shaft for fear that of what these creatures might do to me. We had arranged that I would be able to report what was happening from the depths of my trance, and I reported what was going on to Helen and Ken. Helen then immediately said, "I will lift you up through the shaft without your touching the walls. Stay with me, allow me to lift you, and you will come up." Immediately, I started rising through the shaft, came out through the opening in the surface of that planet, and saw the immense blue sky over my head and the very peculiar terrain of this planet. It had a golden color to it. There was no green. There was nothing that I could describe in Earth-like terms. It was a very peculiar construction, very smooth, quite unlike any Earth scene that I have ever been in. There were some other beings on the surface of the planet, but at this point I was not interested in staying there, so I came back into the room in which the three of us were working. Later that afternoon, Helen Bonny wanted to participate in the repeating word experiment. That afternoon, we arranged to run her as a subject. We arranged the experiment in a soundproof room. While she was listening to the repeating word, coming from the loudspeaker near the head of the couch on which she was lying, I was lying on another couch across the room relaxing. As she would hear an alternate, she would repeat the alternate word out loud into a microphone. I noticed that as I became more and more relaxed, I was hearing alternates also. A peculiar effect emerged in that she would say an alternate, I would hear an alternate, which was an answer to hers. The only importance of this observation is that it showed that I was very relaxed. I was allowing and going with the flow. Suddenly, the source of the repeating word, the sound moved from the left-hand side of the room all the way across the room and came inside my head as if I were wearing headphones. My one part of me knew that the loudspeaker out of which the repeating words were coming was on the far side of the room, but another part knew that it was inside my head. I went with this effect, realizing that I was in trance and that this was one of the reprogrammings of the perceptual field that can take place during this particular state of consciousness. Suddenly, even though my eyes were closed, I was looking into a room filled with golden light. I saw a huge chandelier, an immensely beautiful chandelier, hanging from the ceiling. It was filled with warm, loving feelings. No, I was filled with warm, loving feelings and a sense of childish delight and wonder at the beauty of this chandelier in this golden room. I felt the way I had in childhood at the prospect of seeing a palace, of being in a palace like those recounted in fairy stories. The chandelier had prismatic crystal pieces, hundreds of them, hanging around the lights in the chandelier. The light being emitted was a soft golden glow. After the experiment was over, I called up California and I asked my former guide what had happened to her at 3 p.m. She said, at 5 minutes to 3, I looked at the clock and I realized I had to go pick up the children from school. I started down the stairs and I looked at the chandelier hanging from the ceiling in the stairwell. I was overcome with a sense of immense beauty and took a childish delight in admiring it and seeing its fabulous palace-like quality. I skipped on down the stairs, watching it as I went, admiring it, and thoroughly enjoying the experience. I then told her what had happened at the same time to me at a distance of 1,200 miles away. She was delighted and we agreed to meet for further exchange when I got back to California. These two experiences in mental telepathy with my guide showed me one thing, and that is that somehow or other I got into the mind of the other person involved and shared her state. In both cases, her particular mood and emotion was transmitted to me as if I were her. The chandelier was a direct experience of my own, and the burning bed cover was a symbolic transfer of her anger. In this latter case, it may be that I avoided experiencing the anger that she felt and created the symbolic representation myself. In the third experiment with Helen and Ken, I went much deeper and approached the region of the two guides, but I was unable to really penetrate into the region. We then finished the series of experiments, and I left for California. And I'm going to pause here. This is about halfway through chapter 4. Hope you're enjoying this. Please like and subscribe. Leave a comment. That would be most helpful. And till soon. Thanks.